Thanks very much, Ross. So warm welcome to you all on this webinar on test automation, the first of our Resulting's modern ERP series. Today's session is jointly hosted with our partner Tricentis, and you'll get to meet Rob Sherwood in a little while. Oops. So basically over the course of the next 50 minutes or so, we're going to be reaffirming why test automation is key for SAP customers. You might know some of this already, but where test automation is now is very much beyond the oldest use case of supporting just regression test. We'll talk a little bit about where test automation and Tricentis Tosca specifically fit into the overall delivery cycle. You might have heard about the partnership with SAP, but we want to talk to you mostly about truly enterprise testing. Your processes are system agnostic, so your test should be too. We'll show you a demo of the end-to-end capability of Tosca, and then we'll finish up talking about how to build your business case, demonstrate return on investment, and set up for success. So just a little bit about us. My name's Dion Miller. I'm the test capability lead here at Resulting IT. I've worked in the ERP space for over 20 years, mainly in consulting roles. And for a large part of my early career, I worked as a test manager on global SAP programs. And I've definitely experienced the good, bad, and ugly when it comes to manual and automated testing. So I'll introduce you now to Rob Sherwood, who is a partner from Tricentis.
Thanks, Dion. So hi, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to chat to you all today. And thank you to Resulting IT for having us do this joint webinar with you. So my name is Rob Sherwood. I'm based out of London. I'm an enterprise solution architect here at Tricentis. What does that mean? It means that we take our solution or portfolio and overlay that with the objectives that you yourselves are wanting to achieve within your, let's say, delivery lifecycle. So what we tend to do is we tend to stay away from a kind of feature and function discussion. We really try and look at, from a quality assurance perspective, what value can these solutions give you? And I hope in today's session, when I show you one part of the portfolio, you'll start to see what I mean here. Right. So looking forward to it. Back to you, Dia.
Cheers. Okay, so a little bit about why modern ERP. So the conversation for SAP customers, and I'm sure you're all aware, for a few years has been about, when or if they'll move to S4. Is it an upgrade or is it something that really brings business benefit? When should you do it? How much will it cost? And our modern ERP series is looking at what it means to really run enterprise applications in a different way, holistically, looking at the best ways to define your strategy with the business, how to deliver intelligently, and how to be agile and meet your business's needs while still maintaining high levels of quality. And obviously test automation is a key part of this. Embracing innovation and managing change are essential to achieving your strategic goals. And that's why test automation and continuous test automation in particular is something we're talking about here. So just before we move on into the main body of the webinar, just a little bit more about that overall webinar series. So we have a number of additional sessions planned, and you can go to that web address now, and we'll show you again that at the end of the webinar, and register for the other events. So Resulting have been a partner of Tricentis for around a year now, and as you can see, this is why. As a test tools provider, they're best in class, leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for a number of years now, supporting some of the world's biggest brands. Over 1,800 companies globally use Tricentis products, including 7 out of 10 of the world's biggest banks, and across all industry sectors, BP, Dell, Dolby, Experian, real household names. Their platform is versatile, supporting SAP and non-SAP customers at any stage of their modernization, and more on this below. But it's important to think beyond regression. As I mentioned, automation can now be built into any stage of delivery on programs, on projects, in your run organization, in agile and waterfall delivery. If you set up well, you can be reducing effort, delivering faster, and improving quality at all times. Tricentis tools are model-based, and this is really key. They create resilient and scalable automation. It's a vital foundation, and it minimizes maintenance effort when solution changes. And as you're all aware, in SAP, solutions change a lot. And it's really important that you're able to update and maintain tests and impact assess correctly. Taking a risk-based approach to testing minimizes business downtime. And whilst we don't cover as much of that in this session, it's a major part of what testing is ensuring that you run the right scope. Too little, and issues won't be identified. Too much in your testing will hamper delivery. End-to-end technology support across SAP and non-SAP applications. We'll cover that in more detail below, but really Tricentis products are unparalleled in how they support in a no-code way across many different technologies. Cloud-based architecture. Tosca supports SAP's cloud applications as well as on-premise, something which actually SAP's product doesn't do, their own test automation. And that's one of the reasons why they've partnered with Tricentis. And then finally, the solution is no code, and Rob will show you that. It's really business friendly. It's very easy for people to pick up. And it really reduces the need for a team of developer testers who have to code scripts and don't necessarily know your business context. Okay, so here are an example of some of those 1,800 companies that use Tricentis products. Okay, so as SAP customers, you know that enterprise-wide business transformation and really just continued use of your application involves constant innovation. You've got your major programs like moving to S4, harmonizing process, handling the IT side of mergers and acquisitions, bringing new processes onto SAP. You've got product innovation, infrastructure change, support packs, S4 updates, some larger than you expected. But if you're in the cloud, updates could be quarterly or even monthly. So what about major changes to your infrastructure? Data center moves or even replatforming to the cloud. So from a run perspective, programs aren't where it ends, right? So continuous improvement is really the essential part of successful running of SAP. Your business moves at pace. IT needs to keep up. SAP functionality has traditionally been delivered in a waterfall fashion, maybe not really meeting the business's needs from a time perspective. And a business in this day and age that can't streamline process and keep ahead of competitors can quickly become less relevant. Against this backdrop, you can really see why the status quo, which is reflected here, with minimal test automation or a focus just on regression, where end-to-end testing is mostly manual and performed by the business, and where previous forays into automation have maybe given you a low confidence because of how difficult things are to keep up to speed and maintain going forward. Though that status quo can't really support the way you run SAP and your other applications today. But Tricentis test automation has really been proven to help enterprises realize faster testing at much lower risk and significantly lower costs. And that ultimately, you can be accelerating any rollout programs by using automation, for example, on your core solution that you're moving across your different geographies or business units. You can keep up to date with upgrades, software and infrastructure, re-platform with ease, move to agile, and potentially even DevOps. And it's important to note that whilst Tricentis have their own test management tool, they also integrate very well with other testing tools and DevOps tools in particular, so things like Azure DevOps and Jenkins. So I'll now hand over to Rob from Tricentis, who's going to do a bit of a deep dive into Tosca and demonstrate its enterprise capabilities. Thanks, Rob.
Cool, thanks, Dion. So, I mean, as Dion said on the previous slide, there's so much change that's happening, right? Product innovation, business transformation, or even just continuous improvement. So all those changes of innovation relate to the fact that there is a need for testing or quality assurance, also maybe business assurance, right? And when we come to that stage where we recognize that testing is the number one roadblock in terms of quality assurance, in terms of that delivery lifecycle, well, what are the questions that we start to ask ourselves? And as you can see here in this slide, we essentially have three main questions that you would start to ask yourself. Starting on the right-hand side is what to test. When and Dion said this very, very nicely earlier, is, you know, do we test too little? Do we test too much? What is actually relevant to the impact of change? We have a solution for that, and essentially it's called Tricentis Live Compare, or known through the solution extension partnership that SAP and Tricentis have as the change impact analysis solution. We won't be touching on that today, but we are more than happy to facilitate that at a later point. On the on the left-hand side now with does it scale, this is the performance aspect, right? We need to address this question of modernizing our ERP estate. We're going to be utilizing upstream and downstream components. We're going to have an omni-channel where our customers engage, and the performance of that needs to be up to par, right? And so we need to address that, and we can with the Tricentis Neoload solution, also known as enterprise performance testing. But for today's demonstration and presentation, we're going to be looking at the enterprise continuous testing solution, also known as Tricentis Tosca. This is the flagship product or solution of Tricentis when we were formed in 2007. And what we'll go through today is essentially how the technology can do true end-to-end testing. What do I mean by that? Not only focus on SAP, as we know SAP is not just an island, but looking at different upstream and downstream technologies alike. On the next slide, you will see that, or you'll get a flavor when I do my demonstration of these technology adapters that Tricentis Tosca has underneath the hood of its application. So Dion mentioned this no code aspect. Well, it's as simple as starting up the application, scanning the different objects on the screen that you want to interact with as part of your test, and then running that test, right, with the relevant data. So the user experience won't be compromised or changed depending on what the technology and the test is. And I think that's really important. It all follows the same concept, the same kind of design and user experience, which you'll see shortly. On the next slide, Dion, if you can. What I want to highlight on this slide is that when we talk about automation, we talk about we can achieve higher automation rates. There's no doubt about that. Risk-based testing becomes super relevant in terms of how do we prioritize our test cases, how do we understand exactly what we need to test, but also what we've got to cater for within this end-to-end test that we can achieve with this technology is that we have to recognize that we are interacting with multiple different systems or services. What happens if a service is potentially offline? Is there a quick and effective means to virtualize that particular service so that our end-to-end test isn't necessarily impacted and we can still test deep and continuous? Of course, we need to handle multiple mechanisms of test data, whether it be masked, anonymized, synthetically created, but most important, stateful or transactional data. Of course, and as Dion said, we have native integrations with many different technologies out there. To highlight a couple is obviously the solution manager test suite aspect, and then of course the live compare product. On the next slide, here's an indication of what I'm going to show you today. Right, I'm going to show you how we can scan the technology under test, how we can quickly and effectively drag these scanned modules or Lego blocks into this test case section, configure all the relevant steps that relate to the test case, and then how we can maintain those going forward. So I'm really excited to now switch into a live presentation of the solution itself. Of course, this session is ready for you, so please do type any questions that you may have inside the Q&A, and maybe we can stop and answer them halfway through my presentation, or ultimately we can get to them at the end. So hopefully you can see my screen. Dion, Ross, can you confirm?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Right. So for those of you who haven't had a look at Tricentis Tosca before, this is essentially it. It is an intuitive application which has multiple tabs here at the top indicating specific areas that you may be in, like our test case section, where we want to do some API testing or service virtualization. Essentially, we just click on those and the icons obviously changed dynamically. What you'll see further down here is different tabs that indicate specific areas that help contribute to quality assurance within your organization. So we start on the left-hand side. This is our test case section where we have these business readable test cases that we'll go through quite extensively during this presentation. The modules section is where we can go and scan any technology under the sun, build those Lego blocks as I mentioned, and where we can drag those Lego blocks into this blue section to create these test cases. Of course, once we've built this automation, we need to execute this, and we need to execute it either locally or in a distributed, unattended manner. And that can happen within this green section over here. We do need traceability throughout our whole quality assurance process, and that is really defined within the requirements section. Dion mentioned obviously the ability to integrate into the CI/CD ecosystem, but also, and she mentioned obviously like Azure DevOps, where you might have defined your requirements in there. We can obviously pull those requirements directly into Tricentis Tosca. That's just one example. Of course, we could do that the same for like Jira. Now, once we've defined the requirements and we have our baseline and we have that traceability aspect, how do we know exactly what the right test cases are that we need to build? When automation is as easy as you're going to see today, what are the right scenarios that we need to test to maximize our risk coverage? And through some very, very clever means, we can design the test cases in that optimized manner. Of course, if in the execution zone we get any particular issues or defects, we can raise those defects and we can handle those issues with inside Tricentis Tosca. But of course, we can also integrate directly into your defect management tool of choice, like Jira or Solution Manager ITSM as an example. Now, with that being said, these two modules, or three modules, the test cases and the modules and the execution is where we're going to focus focus on today. We're going to start off with this particular test case, which is a VA01 transaction. For those of you who don't know it, it is a create sales order transaction. And we're going to start off with an ECC Win GUI technology. So if we expand this particular test case, it starts off with a particular enter transaction, right? That's the transaction code. That's the button that we're entering or clicking on to move to the next screen. And on the next screen, as you can see here, we're going to be entering in specific deep values that are relevant to this particular screen. And then we're going to move on to the next one, as you can see here with this enter button over there. Of course, what is a test case with where there's no verification point? It's meaningless in my opinion, right? We need to verify an expected outcome. So throughout this automated process, you will see, or test case, you will see that we're going to verify the net value in currency that is going to be generated within the application itself. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go a little bit off script here and put in a (01) because I want to flag a particular defect, so you can see how we can handle that. Of course, another thing that's very important to note is really the ability to store dynamically generated data during runtime itself, transactional data, right? So in this case here, there's going to be a sales order that's going to be generated. I want to capture and verify that I've captured that number so that if I move on to, let's say, the next transaction or another technology, I can insert that same variable at that particular point. And we'll go into more detail about that later in my presentation. Nevertheless, let me quickly log into my SAP login screen. Hopefully remember my password, which thankfully I do. And let's go and have a look at this test case running. And what I'm going to do before I do that, I'm just going to drop it in this resulting IT execution list in this green section. And now we're going to run this. Obviously, I'm running it locally in this example, but you can have this automatically scheduled at any point in time. So what we're seeing here is really automation in its purest form. We see that the Tosca agent is started up at the bottom. We're entering in the material, and shortly we're going to verify net value and the currency up here. Now, indicated by the status bar down below, we see there's actually been a particular default or error that has come in, defect that has come in. But triaging through the results, we can actually see where that particular failure occurred. We can see the total duration of this particular test case. It took a total of 14 seconds. We can see all the test steps that passed. And here we can see where that verification had failed. The expected value was this, and the actual value was that. Is that a particular defect? In my opinion, that is, because we could be missing out on some additional revenue. Now, at this particular point, if there is a defect, we can raise that. So I click on this execution deck, and you see this bug-shaped icon. We could click that, it will raise a defect, or we could maybe even include a feature request. And that could be handled within Tosca or put into Azure DevOps or Jira or whatever you choose. Now, with that being said, how do we create these modules, right? So I've got a number of different test cases that I'm going to walk you through today. We're going to just look how we can scan a technology. We're then going to look how we can scan another technology, in this case, a Fury technology, and then another one over here, which is just PDF validation. We're then going to look at, once we understand how the mechanism of scanning technologies works, we're going to, again, scan an HTML application, but I'm going to show you here how we can avoid this, the test automation nightmare of maintenance. Further down, we've got an order-to-cash business process that consists of multiple different transactions, and I'm going to talk to you about how, as you're modernizing your ERP and estate, how even as something as simple as like a PDF output that you need to validate is combined into one single test case. Also, how we handle transactional data and so on and so forth. And then finally, we'll wrap it up with just a nice end-to-end use case, which actually combines a number of these different technologies all in one single test. With that being said, let's focus on this one. It's a blank test case. Let's go and see how we scan technologies. So in this case here, I've got my module section. I'll start off with a blank and empty folder. I right-click on that folder and I select scan. Now, as you can see here, I can choose multiple different scanning mechanisms to, depending on the technology that we're interacting with, right? Whether it be mobile, PDF, or maybe an application. No matter which layer I choose, essentially it all follows the same principle. It starts up a scanning agent such as this. In the case of an application, it's going to try and identify all the different applications that I currently have open on my desktop. I'm going to select the one that's relevant. I'm going to right click on it just to highlight the fact that that adapter that I spoke to you earlier has basically identified that this is an SAP technology. And at this point, now I'm going to scan that screen. So what this scanning utility is going to do is it's going to pick up all the different objects that you see within the screen, and it's going to list them out for us here. Of course, we could walk through this particular list and select the ones that are relevant, or we could just from a usability point of view is just choose the select on screen functionality. And here, as I move my mouse around, essentially I am able to select the ones that are relevant to my particular test case. Now, it's important to note that now I've selected several different objects within the screen that are relevant to my test. I'm now building one module per screen. So essentially, if there is another test case that maybe leverages off the screen, we could reuse that same module. It's important to know that, right? Also, one thing to notice, and you'll see this throughout my demonstration, is that the items are unique. Now, what does that mean, right? Well, when we think about maintenance, we think about how do we adjust, let's say, the scripts or the in a traditional legacy, let's say, tool, how do we adjust the scripts to cater for things moving and changing within the screen? If we went on like an X and Y coordinates, it could put some brittleness within our application. If we went on an image-based aspect, it again could put brittleness within our application. Through our technology support, what we do is we uniquely identify the various different objects based on, let's say, the program name, the screen name, or the transaction. So essentially it builds that robustness into this particular test case, allowing for all those relevant changes. So in this example, if sales group had to swap with sales office, we could still interact with it as an example. Of course, once you've done scanning a particular screen like this, we go into the back into Tosca, and we can see that there's been a flat image of our system under test that is taken into account. We've got the different objects in here that we've scanned. I can even move them and modify them around should I choose. And by simple drag and drop, I go onto my test case and create the first test step. The first test step is something that I need has no values at this stage. So I need to enter those values, right? So I'll put in like my sales org, my distribution channel. Let me just make sure I've got that all right. My division, sales office, and then finally sales group. Now, of course, at this particular point, from a user experience point of view, I want to make sure that I run it locally first, just to see that it all works fine. So I'll put that in there. And you'll see now it will interact with the system under test and click on that next button, taking us to the next screen. So now we could go and scan this particular screen should we choose. Now the thing is, the same can be said for, let's say, Fury, right? Whether it be the GUI embedded in a Fury application or UI5, essentially it follows the same principle, right? So I'm just going to run those first test steps, which is really just opening up my browser and allowing me now to select the relevant tile that I want. So here's my tile. And at this point, I'm just going to scan the screen. Once again, it's as simple as going into the module section, right-clicking on it, saying scan application. And we'll start up the scanning utility. It will identify all the technologies that I have on my desktop. If I right-click on this, you can see it. So it identified this as HTML once again. I now can scan that. And once again, following that same principle that we saw earlier, by just using the select on screen functionality, I choose the relevant ones that I want within my test. Now, as you can see, it obviously has also included the fact that there's maybe complex backend technologies like iframes that are coming into place here. It handles that automatically for us, which is super important to note. Once again, before I save this, all these items are uniquely identified. So we built that robustness and resiliency within our test. As simple as scanning that within a matter of seconds, we have now created our module, our Lego block, essentially, and we can drag that onto our test case and create our next test step, where we could enter in specific values and so on and so forth. So I'll just quickly type this up, like ZOR, A01. Now, one of the things that I typically get asked at this point by my customers is, okay, but what you're doing here is you entering in the data pretty much manually, right? You're hard coding it. Is there not a better way to do it? And of course there is, right? Within the technology and what I'm showing you here, I'm only showing you really the automation part, but essentially there are multiple different mechanisms in order to handle test data. For example, one of the key areas is the test case design section. So when and should you want to, as a follow-up session with the resulting on ourselves, we're more than happy to go into more detail about how we can generate the different combinations that are going to drive the automation. But in this case here, we've now seen two technologies that we've been able to scan and automate. Let's have a look at something completely different, which is a PDF validation. So what I've got here, I have got a PDF that I got from the resulting IT website, which is don't migrate to S/4HANA until you have read this research. Very, very compelling document. Would definitely encourage you to have a look through it. But what we want to do in here is we want to actually validate something on, let's say page 30 over here. We want to validate that this text is correct, as an example. So define your current ECC scope in a way that allows you to map what's different in S4 for your business case roadmap and migration plan. Very, very valid. So we want to validate that. So what we can do in once again inside Tosca, we go into the module section. Instead of scanning application, we go and choose scan PDF. What it will now do is it'll open up the scanning mechanism. In this case, it's a little bit different because obviously we're looking into a PDF. I'll go into the PDF report. And at this particular point, I can scroll through all the pages and verify various different things on here. In this case, I'll scroll right towards the end. And here we've got define your current ECC scope. And now I can utilize 3 scanning techniques which are relevant within PDFs. I want to do either text, image, or maybe even take into account a table and the values that are within that table. In this case, I'm going to just select text. I'll draw a box over it. So let me pull it up. You see I've got a PDF area over here. I'm now going to just show the content pane so I can see what has been taken into this PDF. So let's call this takeaway, right? From this research. And once again, now that I've scanned that, it's as simple as closing this, saving it. And here you can see it's got my, let's say my scan, the object that I've identified, and then it's obviously going to take into account the target PDF, which is really this name over here. So let's just rename this again, called takeaway. Drag it simply onto the PDF validation test. Here we put in the target PDF, and we want to verify that. So at this point here, what it's going to do when I run this in my Scratchbook again from a local point of view, it's going to go into this document and then obviously validate that specific text. So here we can see, and I'll just drag this onto the section over here. Verification was successful. The expected value was this and the actual value was that. So now what we've done is we've looked at 3 different technologies. We looked at how we can scan them, and we've spoken a little bit about that maintenance burden of things moving around the screen. But how do we take into account a delivery lifecycle that's one day where there's so many moving parts? How do we quickly react to that impact of change? Right? How do we maintain these modules? And in this example of this vehicle insurance application, which is a simple HTML application, it's just really about, it's one of the applications we use for demo purposes. It's about creating a specific quote for insurance. Super straightforward, right? Now, what we want to do here is we want to, once again, we want to build up automation for it. We want to verify a truck and some vehicle details relevant to truck. So as a user, again, I'm going to go and scan the technology on the test. Once again, just to highlight, it's picked this up as an HTML application. I'm going to click scan. And now I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to first of all select on screen the truck link. So that's uniquely identified. I'm going to say finish screen, move to that truck, click on that truck link. I'm now going to scan this particular screen over here, and I'm going to take into account all the vehicle data in this particular screen and only the ones with the stars next to it. So at this point here, I'm going to select the make, the engine performance, the data manufacturer, fuel type, and then the annual mileage. Now, the great thing about these is, once again, they're all unique. How have we uniquely identified them? Well, if we take into account the make, you'll see that it's uniquely identified by this ID that it's extracted from the HTML DOM structure. So the technology powering this in the back end. Now, there are multiple different mechanisms of identifying objects should you have some complex areas. Typically, the scanning mechanism will identify them straight away. But if you need to adjust and build in some more robustness, you can build in some anchoring. Image, of course, we mentioned that earlier, it is prone to some brittleness. So I wouldn't really recommend it, but it does have its place. And then obviously like its index. So from a screen loading perspective, what is generated first to last, if there are multiple makes, as an example. Nevertheless, all of these have been uniquely identified. We can obviously change these names, and irrespective of us changing those names, it's still uniquely identified, right? Because of that ID engine performance, as an example here at the back. With that being said, I'm going to close this, once again, saving it. We're going to jump back into Tosca, and we've got 2 modules that we're going to simply drag onto the test case section. And we now have 2 test steps. The first one is where we're going to click on this particular link. The next one is where we're going to enter in vehicle data. And here you can see that we've extracted from the HTML DOM structure a drop-down list. So let's put in Volvo, for example, engine performance is 200, data manufacturers 0101 2014. number of seats is 3, fuel type, this is once again diesel to truck, payload it's let's say 900, total weight is 1,000, and then list price is 80, and then annual mileage would be about 23,000, right? So at this particular point, we've now entered in the relevant values. Let's go back to our application, go back to the home screen, and let's run it. So what we're going to see here is the mouse or the cursor is going to move. It's going to click on that particular truck link. We're going to move to the next particular screen, at which point we're going to start to enter in the relevant data. So see shortly, and there we are. Now we spoke about uniquely identifying the elements within the screen, but of course, what happens if there is new adjustments? So for example, like a version 2 or version 1.2 in this case, has now brought in this license plate number plus then the next button, because maybe these have now all come online and we need to build it. Now, obviously through the release cadence, we need to take into account these changes in a quick and effective manner. And what you'll notice about each particular test step is that it's linked to its relevant module. So if I right click on it and say jump to its module, it will take me to that module that we scanned. So that means if we had multiple variations of these test cases, essentially they would all be linked to that same module. So if we had to right click on this module and rescan it to take into account some particular changes, then it would propagate to all those associated test steps. So in this case here, as simple as just rescanning, it will bring up this the scanning utility. It will identify all the objects that we've got on the page already. And all we need to do is just select, let's say, the license plate number, and of course, the next button over there. As simple as that, we then close it down, jump back into Tosca. We can see that there is the license plate number that has been added, as well as the next button, and that is relevant in our test once again. So now we've had a look at a number of technologies. We've had a look at how we can handle maintenance, reduce that burden significantly that you would normally face with other legacy tools out there. And now we have a look at a full business process, right? If we think about SAP being our core, we need to make sure that we can facilitate the business processes that feed into SAP, right? But as we're modernizing our state, as we are building in additional functionality to maybe complement an industry trend or customer or competition demand, we need to account for the fact that SAP is not an island. We have multiple different technologies out there. So we need a means to cater for those different technologies, but we also need a means to support test data that moves through those technologies alike. At this particular test case, this order to cash process is going to do a couple of things. So first and foremost, let me actually log out of my SAP system because it's going to start off with best practices. It's going to start in and log in and with various different business parameters, log into my system with my relevant user and credentials. Now, I purposely put this as unhidden. You can encrypt this should you choose, right? It's a very simple process to do that. But of course, you want to log in with the right relevant test user. You want to then go in and run the first transaction within a order to cash, which is an inquiry, right? We inquire about goods or services that this particular customer might inquire about goods or services that essentially we sell or provide. So we want to run this inquiry at the end of it. So we've got multiple different test steps in here. We're entering in all relevant details like sales, org, distribution channel, and so on. At the very end of this particular transaction, we are going to buffer or store that variable. At this point here, we're going to take that variable and we're going to actually hand it over in the second transaction, this create quotation, where we're going to enter in that query number again. So what we stored here that's dynamically generated, we're going to hand it back in here so that we can continue our business process. Of course, there is going to be an outcome of all of this stuff, and that outcome is a simple thing as a PDF, a different technology entirely. So what we saw earlier about how we scanned it, we can do the same, and then with this PDF, it's essentially an SAP invoice that's going to be, or quotation that's going to be generated, and on here we're going to validate a couple of things like, hey, what is the quotation number? Let's figure out some of the sold to party and shipped to party details. What is the gross weight of materials or the final amount? Now, all that stuff is going to reside within that PDF document. Now, throughout the whole process, we're going to see that happening again. There's another PDF validation out here, and we want to validate that. So a simple drag and drop of that particular test case. Let's go into this execution list, and let's go and execute this particular test case itself. So what we're going to now see is we're going to see as a precursor or precondition, following best practices, we're going to log in with the relevant user. We're going to go into create inquiry. We're going to go in and enter in all the relevant dates, verify net values, buffer and store variables, enter them in over here, go into the next particular test case. Excuse me. So now we're creating the quotation. As an output of this, we're going to go and generate a PDF document. We're going to validate the contents of that document, and then we're going to move on to the next particular transaction. So here we're going into the create sales order. This is the VA01. As you saw earlier, we could scan how we scan the screen, one of the screens of this particular transaction. At this particular point, after the create sales order, we obviously then going to go and do the outbound delivery. So what you see here, the outbound delivery has been catered for. And of course, we now create the billing document. Once again, a PDF is going to be generated. We're going to validate the contents of this invoice that's raised, and then we're going to move in and finally close that particular process. So there were 5 different transactions. There were 2 different technologies in this particular test case, and it took about 1 minute and 10 seconds to run. At this point, we can see a number of different test steps. We can see what the system name was, the clients. We can see verification points like the invoice over here, where it verified on page 1 what the invoice number was that we had buffered or stored earlier and then have now passed down. Now, finally, just to kind of close it up before I hand back to Dion, we don't only necessarily have the ability to support SAP. As I mentioned, SAP is not just an island, so we can support multiple different technologies. But I do want to reinforce that the creation of this is as simple as kind of scanning it and running through it. So here we've got a test case of 6 different technologies. Once again, even if it's an API where we're creating maybe some test data in a synthetic manner, or maybe verifying VAT through an RFC call, it's again a simple and logical kind of mechanism to do this, right? Here we're adding in a math that's rounding that net value, and then we're also catering for the VAT that's added to it. Again, even if it's like a spreadsheet and we want to store our test results, as you can see here, this is what is your table, this is the particular column, and these are the particular cells that you're interacting with and inserting that relevant data. I won't run this due to just being conscious of time. I know we have a few more slides to go, but I really do hope that you recognize that with Tosca, we can automate your landscape, but automation is not the be all and end all. We need to think about how do we focus on what is exactly relevant to the impact of change. Why should we automate everything under the sun when we only need to test what's relevant? With that being said, Dion, I'd like to hand back over to you. I'll stop sharing my screen if you want to continue sharing your slides.
Thanks, Rob. Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okie dokie. So as Rob mentioned, test automation isn't the be all and end all. You can still, identify the wrong things and automate too much or too little. And so it's really important to just consider that, particularly as part of your business case, that understanding what to test and whether or not you have other tooling that could potentially integrate with your test automation tool can really add that value. So, we talked about Tricentis Live Compare. There are a number of options in terms of change impact analysis. Tricentis Live Compare is pretty unparalleled in terms of what it offers from an SAP perspective. And it analyzes the contents of your transports. And because it basically integrates with Tosca, it can then identify the tests that you need to perform and identify whether or not you've got good coverage. So do you have tests that cover the risks of what's changing in your next release package? There are other ways if you want to look across the enterprise. We have a product fusion graph, and you can do analysis of business processes agnostic of system and be able to do a really sophisticated risk analysis on those. And again, do things like upgrade analysis for new S4 upgrades, etc. The other side of it that we mentioned is around Tricentis Neoload, and one of the really great advantages of that product, which is around performance testing, is that it integrates with Tosca also. So you can basically use your automated functional test scripts from Tosca and pass them over to Neoload. And Neoload will basically use those same test scripts for that wider performance testing, which is absolutely amazing from a maintenance and simplicity perspective. Okay, so far so good. But really, how do you build that business case then to take things forward? So being able to demonstrate, how you'll get that return on investment is essential. And understanding your current challenges and desired outcomes are really the best place to start. Challenges such as poor or unknown test coverage, which means that you're not necessarily getting the right hits and you're encountering more failures later in your test phases. Defects being found in those late delivery cycles, lengthy release cycles, testing too much or too little, costly test resources, those developer testers, because you've got some automation, but it really doesn't work as well as you'd like. Poor maintenance of test assets, impossible or difficult to run end-to-end tests, and then also a myriad of different tools and licenses, which can cause significant problems from a cost perspective. Okay, so the desired outcomes, really, you want to have known and risk-based test coverage. You want your defects found as early as possible with minimal or zero defects post-go live. Frequent delivery of change, as I say, moving to agile or DevOps. Risk-based execution using sophisticated change impact analysis. Reduced or redeployed testing headcount, easy to maintain assets, a test pack that reflects your solution with seamless integration across the app landscape, and a single tool set for automation and tool vendor relationship. So we can help you in developing that business case and really to demonstrate how you get return on investment. So obviously the first bit is around that problem statement and identifying the opportunity, and connecting with your business strategic thrusts. Research and team interviews really support this in terms of its full definition. Then after that, it's really about modeling your cost benefits. So gathering the information for all of those items in terms of the problems that you had, and then identifying the benefits in terms of implementing the new tool set. We have a model that we can use with you to really drive that detail out. And optionally, we can run a proof of value to back up the model, which in some clients really, really helps demonstrate the capabilities of the product to meet your specific needs. And then finally, all of that's kind of irrelevant if you don't have a good implementation roadmap. You really need to be able to show how over time you achieve the desired outcomes, that it's a realistic plan, and how you're going to increase maturity and identify ways to measure your benefits and really demonstrate that and realize that return on investment. So, this is just a quick example of some of the outputs that can be created, really showing that improvement and return on investment over time. So I'm just going to pass to Rob again quickly, who can talk about a few testimonials from other clients who have realized those benefits.
Thanks, Dion. So this is a great slide that kind of depicts some of our flagship customers and what they've achieved with the solutions. Of course, you can visit our website and you can see these in the stories in a lot more detail. But you can see that based on the outcomes that they've achieved with our solution, they're impressive, right? Now, what that essentially means is, well, it's a great outcome. What does that mean for the likes of ExxonMobil? if they can go to a one-day release cycle with the right amount of quality, all while reducing costs, it means they can also factor in different, adjust their business to cater for different, let's say, industry trends like sustainability, changing their organization to decrease their carbon emission footprint or whatever that might be, and all the kind of technical infrastructure that goes behind that. So while we can achieve great outcomes, it's also about the journey that you go on and how we can also, let's say, complement that journey between Tricentis as well as resulting for you. So I won't go into too much more detail. Dion, I'll hand back over to you.
Cheers. Thanks a lot, Rob. Okay, so before I open up to questions, I just wanted to thank you all for your attendance today. We're really eager to talk to you about next steps to help you enhance your test capability and take you to the next level in terms of helping drive business value. Thanks very much. Ross, do we have any questions posted so far?
Yeah, so we've got one that's just come through. What benefits does Tosca bring to day-to-day delivery?
Rob, yeah?
Yeah, I can do that. So I think the ExxonMobil was a great example, right? Is if you can accelerate your release cycles, then you can essentially bring about further innovation. Dion chatted about like product innovation, business transformation, or just continuous improvement. Like those key themes, if you can accelerate your delivery cycle, you can bring in about those on let's say a daily basis. But Tosca isn't just one part. It is definitely a significant part of that puzzle there, right? Because traditionally speaking, testing is essentially the number one roadblock to delivery. And that's due to what Dion said earlier with regards to low automation rates, business users getting involved, and so on and so forth. So as I showed you earlier, in order to you want to make sure that you can automate, and you clearly saw that from our presentation. You can automate with this product. You can remove those typical roadblocks, so you can deliver a lot faster. So I hope that kind of answered your question. Dion, I don't know if you want to add anything else in that.
No, I mean, I think absolutely. It's that, being able to really use Tosca to help you move to that more agile way of working. And as we both said, doing that, it's not about buzzwords. It's about delivering the value to the business when they need it.
Yeah, great.